Hello, class. Professor Cisneros here, and this is the Week 6 wrap up. And in this week's discussion board, you were to summarize the protections in place in either India or China, whichever you were assigned to, and then compare them to the ICH GCP guidelines. This is a perfect example or a perfect assignment for putting this sort of information together in tables. So it's very clear, very concise, and there's not a lot of verbiage that can oftentimes be very confusing. It gets right to the point. A lot of you all did that, not everybody, and because what happens when you write things, when you're trying to present this sort of information this way, if you do it in a table form, then it's you cut down on, quite frankly, the number of words. It's very efficient and it gets right to the point. And oftentimes in our industry, this is exactly what we need. Again, we're not shooting for prose. This is not literature. So keep that in mind in the future. I always like question, answer, and it's very clear as to exactly how you're presenting the information, exactly how you're addressing the question that you're being asked to. If what I've seen in the past is that there can be a blending of ideas that may address some of one question and sort of bleed into another, and it makes the presentation very muddled. So keep that in mind. A couple of questions came up during this week, which I thought were excellent. I saw a lot of very good discussion, but I thought I would address some of these here. So the difference between undue influence and coercion. Coercion is very easy compared to undue influence. You can either, my ideas of coercion, and I've always put forth the idea to avoid levels of coercion. So investigators can't enroll their employees, even if they have nothing to do with the study, employee family members. So to avoid any sort of conflict of interest, that's one of the rules that I've always set forth. Another form of coercion is having patient compensation too high, and that's why IRBs and ECs want to see this in the ICF. They want to see exactly what they're being compensated for. So if you're coming in for a study, I don't know, let's say it's an asthma study, and there's not a lot of procedures and it's not a whole lot of time, you may pay somebody the equivalent of 50 US dollars or USD for a particular visit. But let's say it's a brand new drug, that doesn't justify somebody paying a subject for let's say a 2-hour visit, paying them $500. That's a form of coercion, in addition to investigators who apply pressure on, let's say, on their employees. You could have coercion. I've seen coercion where, let's say, well, again, we're back to pressuring, let's say, actually vendors. I've seen vendors actually being pressured to pretend they are participating in a study. That's a form of coercion. Undue influence is a little bit grayer, and this was discussed as if, let's say, in China and India, this is the only place in the world that this happens. It's just a little bit more obvious. An undue influence is where you have a relationship with a patient, and the patient will essentially sit back and say, "Doctor, do you think this will be all right? Do you think this is a good move for me? And do you think I could possibly benefit from that?" And just based on that, the subject, if the investigator says, "Absolutely, that's why I'm asking you, I think you should definitely participate," and then they go ahead and sign the consent, and off they go. Those sorts of relationships exist all over the world. I've seen it there is no place in the world, and I've conducted studies in a lot of countries. The last big study I did was in 30 plus countries, and visited many of them. And there's no place that I've ever been where that doesn't exist. And, it's one of the reasons why people go to physicians. They have a lot of respect for them, and they trust their judgment. And so that is a level of undue influence that is very difficult to control. And this is for me. This is where the education and of why people do studies, as well as about the study and the kinds of patients that you're going to be looking for. You're going to have some investigators who have an appropriate patient population, and they're going to be able to enroll a significant number of subjects compared to some other places. And unfortunately, for better for worse, in countries of lower socioeconomic status, countries with a lot of poor people, if you have investigators whose patient population consists of a lot of poor people, they're going to be incentivized almost. And again, it's very difficult to say. I mean, it's well understood that they're going to participate in these studies, and it's up to the physician to say whether or not it's a good move or not. I myself, when I was in grad school, participated in many phase 1 healthy volunteer studies. In one case, I was actually the first human to actually receive a new drug on the market. Was there undue influence? The undue influence was the money I was going to be making as a result of participating in these trials. Is that right or wrong? It's always a gray area. If there was not any money offered, I would have never participated, and you'll never be able to enroll trials if you remove that level of incentive. And what you could say is that undue influence. The next area, the next question that sort of came up was removing payments from PIs. In other words, not paying investigators for the work that they're doing on the study, for enrolling patients and trying to find another investigator, say a primary care doc, to actually be able to identify subjects and then refer them. That creates a greater level of complexity, and if the idea is to remove any sort of undue influence, that primary care doc has got to be compensated for his own time. So in effect, all you'd end up doing is shifting that responsibility and shifting that ability to have that influence on their own individuals. And besides that, my thinking is that, like I mentioned on the discussion board, if you have an asthma trial, you're going to go to let's say that you have a COPD study, you're going to go to a pulmonologist. If you have an asthma study, you may go to a physician who sees a lot of asthma patients and who knows their patients very well. The physicians who know their patients or who have a large patient population, they're going to know their patients better than any PCP that you see on the side. So it's just that it's an idea that simply would, in my opinion, would simply not work. Physicians are also paid fair market value. So if you have a physician in South Africa, they're going to make per patient significantly less than somebody in the U.S. or somebody in Finland or the U.K. And it's based on typically what they would be making performing those same procedures in those countries. And removing that, nobody would ever participate, because trials and all of those procedures take up a tremendous amount of time. And physicians, and as well as their staffs, everybody deserves to be compensated, because then the flip side of that would be if somehow you manage to be able to enroll the study without properly compensating your investigators and or their staffs, it could easily be said that the only people then benefiting financially would be the sponsor company who's developed the drug, because they saved all of that money, and now they are going to be reaping the benefits. So it's a complicated situation. You don't want subjects participating in the study that have not been properly consented. I've gone so far as to go through and provide training for investigators and their staffs at face-to-face investigator meetings where I thought that there might be a gap in their knowledge, because that's what it comes down to. You have to impart on all the investigators those ideas that you want them to share. So you want them to understand that it's very wrong to be enrolling subjects in a study where those patients are not appropriate for the study. And this is why we have monitors. It's a system of checks and balances. We have monitors that are going to be looking to ensure the best that they can, that subjects are being consented. And the other way you can really find out if they're not being consented, if they are truly being influenced, if there's a complaint that comes in through the system, whether it's from a staff member or from a patient or a patient's family, and anytime, and quite frankly, they're not common. It's very rare that you would actually see that. It's very rare that I've ever seen complaints that come through. But they're always worth investigating to find out exactly what is happening. You need to look at the data to be sure that the subjects are actually eligible and they meet all the criteria, and that they're not coming from a vulnerable population. Again, ensuring that all of these checks and balances are being met. Do they fail? Yes, sometimes they do, and every system is imperfect. But it's always worth the discussion and trying to improve upon it. As always, good luck on the discussion board. Next week you have your assignment 2 coming up. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me, and I will look forward to reading your papers.